Is it megapixel count important in your photography or not? Let's talk a little bit about this topic, and let's talk a little bit about a few tips how you can improve your photography with a higher megapixel camera. Hello everybody, my name is Attila Mate from Blue Sky Photography, and today I'd like to talk to you about megapixel count and if it is important or not in your photography. How you can have nice and sharp photos with a full frame high megapixel count camera. I don't know if you had the possibility to handle a high megapixel full frame camera. I'm talking about the 36 megapixel camera or even higher. But I used to have the Sony A7R myself, and I have to tell you that I was several times in situation when I realized when I got home from a photo shoot that my photos are not really sharp. And at the beginning I was wondering, what's the problem? What do I do wrong? You know, why my photos are not sharp? And after a while, I started to study about this, and I realized after a while that there is a kind of handling you have to deal with the high megapixel camera. It's not the same like if you have a 24 megapixel APS-C size sensor. Now, how do you get sharp photos with a 36 megapixel full frame camera? There are a few tips. Well, these are my tips, you know, and if you think that you know something else, you know, which is constructive and somebody can learn from it, feel free to leave a comment down below, and let's help others, you know, to learn in photography and improve photography. So the bigger is the sensor you have to handle, you have to handle the camera more carefully. Now this is I would say very, very important, because the bigger is the sensor and higher is the megapixel count, there is more detail in the photo, and it's a little bit too long, you know, if I talk about the pixel density over here, but I will place a card up here, and you can check this video out, which one is about pixel density and why pixel density is important, because you have to understand pixel density in order to understand what I'm talking about over here. Now, I am sorry, but sometimes I have to look at my phone because I made some notes, you know, just to not forget everything. So I chimp sometimes down here, you know, on my phone. I'm sorry about that. So the first tip would be to get sharp images in a high megapixel full frame camera is watch your movement when you shoot. Now, many photographers will think that if I take the camera, you know, and I just make the photo and run, you know, I mean, you move very fast, especially photographers who work in fast environment like weddings, you know, or events, or these kind of photographers, they have the tendency to do that. I know, because I'm a wedding and portrait photographer, and sometimes when I was in a wedding, you know, I had the tendency to just shoot and run and to take as much photos and as much moments as possible. But in the same time, you must be aware that this is not the right thing to do. So slow down and don't rush, because any movement, any extra movement you add to your photos, it will affect your photos. And it will affect negatively, I tell you. So this would be the first tip: slow down and don't rush. Second tip: watch your shutter speed. Now, I have another video again about shutter speed and why is important shutter speed and how to set your shutter speed. I will place again a card up here, and if you don't know about this, please check out that video, because it's a helpful video, I would say, in regards to shutter speed. So just briefly, your shutter speed, there is a golden rule, I would say, and that would be, it must be the minimum shutter speed you use, it must be equal with the focal length of your lens. What it means, if you use 150 millimeter lens, your shutter speed, the minimum shutter speed has to be 1/150th of a second. If you use a 200 millimeter lens, the minimum shutter speed, it has to be 1/200th of a second. Now, in my experience and in my opinion, it is better if you use more than equal. What I would suggest, and what I use most of the time, I try to use at least 1.5 times my shutter speed. It means like if I have a 150 millimeter lens, I try to use 1/200th of a second or maybe more, 1/250th of a second. If I have a 200 millimeter lens, sorry, I will use 1/300th of a second, because if you use higher shutter speed, the risk that your picture will have motion blur in it, it is smaller and smaller. So this is my tip, and I think that it is better to use higher shutter speed than experience with lower shutter speed, even if your lens is optical stabilized. And don't forget that many photographers will say, yeah, I have optical stabilization. Yes, you have optical stabilization, but that doesn't help you at all if your subject is moving a tiny bit. Like I am moving just like that. Just like that. If your subject is moving just like that, the optical stabilization is 0, is equal with a big 0. Don't forget about this. So tip number 3, use any type of support you can. Use your elbow, get a support or any other possibility, tripod, monopod, whatever. Now I will show you a few tips how I shoot with a longer lens, you know, like a few positions how I shoot with a longer lens, and you can help me out if you think that it's you know a better technique or something. You can help me out and help others out, you know, and please show us or tell us or whatever. I will show you with my camera, you know, how I do. So 1 second. So here I have my trusted Nikon D7200, and this is the Sigma 52-100. It's a pretty big lens, like we can say it's like the 70-200 f2.8, something like that size. So what I do most of the time when I shoot, I stay just like that so you can see what I'm talking about. What I do most of the time, I put my elbow near my body, so it is always completely near my body. I stay a little bit forward so you can see. So it's just near my body, and then I take my hand, I put my hand on the lens. But in every case, don't forget, don't put all your palm on the lens, because the bigger is the portion of your palm you touch your lens, the higher is the possibility that you put the vibration to the lens. So I will put only 2 of my fingers. I will hold with 2 of my fingers the lens, and with my other hand here the grip, and then I will put the camera to my eye, and I will push a little bit, just a little bit. I will push to my eye just like that. And when you push to your eye the camera, and when you hold with your 2 fingers and your elbow is near your body, you have a 3-point support to your camera. So it will be, I would say, it will be a great support to your camera. So this is the technique I use most of the time when I'm shooting with a longer lens. Obviously with a smaller lens, you know, it's a smaller problem because the lens and the camera is not so heavy. But if the lens is large like this one, you know, and the camera, and even if you have a battery grip on it, it will be a bit difficult because you will have a lot of weight, you know, in your hand. So this is the technique I use. Now, tip number 4. Acknowledge the disadvantage of the shallow depth of field. You have to be careful calculating the aperture value you need. Again, many photographers will speak about the advantages of a full frame camera and the shallow depth of field and blah blah blah. Nobody speaks about the disadvantage of the shallow depth of field. Honestly, guys, I've seen hundreds of videos about the shallow depth of field and how advantageous is that, but I've seen 0 videos, almost nothing, you know. I couldn't find which one is talking about the disadvantage of the shallow depth of field. So you have to be careful, because shallow depth of field has also disadvantages, not only advantages. And I will tell you just one example what is the disadvantage, and that would be if you shoot a portrait, yeah, and if you shoot a portrait with let's say 85mm f1.2, yeah, the famous Canon lens. It is a brilliant lens, and it is a very nice lens. I feel sorry that Nikon doesn't have something like that, you know, or Sigma should do something like that, you know, because that lens is unique and it is just brilliant. Now, the disadvantage of that lens would be if you do a closer shot, like you see myself from just a tight headshot, let's say, or if you just do head and shoulders shot. If you do something like that, the depth of field is so shallow that one eye, the example, if my head is just turned away like this, one eye it will be in focus, the other one it won't be in focus. So the depth of field is so shallow that much more part of the photo will be out of focus than in focus. I mean, it will be just 1 centimeter or something like that, you know. It's crazy how shallow it can be, the depth of field. Now, if you get your subject far away from the lens, you know, the depth of field will increase. But again, I don't want to explain over here the depth of field because it will be too long. I will place a card up here again. I have a video about the shallow depth of field, and I think that it's a great video to look at. So if you are interested, have a look at it. Now, that would be the reason number 4, the tip number 4, sorry. Tip number 5. Use the best lenses possible. The higher the megapixel count is, the more details you will have in the photos. So you need the best possible lens to get the best possible photo out of it. Now, guys, this is again something where many photographers will not really talk about this. And I tell you why. Why do I use this lens? Why do I use the Sigma Art zooms? Why? It's simple, because these lenses, the Sigma Art lenses, the 50-100 and the 18-35 1.8 zooms, they are the best zooms ever created for APS-C size camera. I'm talking about for APS-C size camera, don't get me wrong. So these are the lenses, the two lenses, the best lenses. There is no other lens. And if somebody disagree with me, it's okay. You can disagree with me, that's not a big issue. We don't have to agree, but I tell you something. I used many lenses, Nikon lenses, Pentax lenses. I didn't use Canon lenses, but I used Nikon, Pentax, Tamron, Sigma, Panasonic lenses, Olympus lenses. I don't know. I used many lenses, and I never got such a good image quality lens like these ones. These are the best lenses, and that's why I use Nikon at the moment. That's why I got back from Sony to Nikon, because of these lenses. Guys, you have to understand, if you want good image quality in your photos or video, you must have the best lenses, because lens is more important than sensor. I tell you, if you have a nice high megapixel sensor and you have a creepy lens on it, crappy lens, but it's zero. The lens will degrade your sensor. And I tell you, this is very important. I cannot emphasize this enough, you know. Lenses are much more important than camera bodies. When I used to have the Sony A7R, that was a 36 megapixel full frame sensor, and I was wondering why my photos are not as sharp, you know, like why? I didn't understand. Well, the reason it was that the lenses were not so good. When I put an excellent lens on that camera, the photos became brilliant. So, these are my 5 tips to improve your photography with high megapixel count. It not necessarily has to be a full frame camera, what I'm talking about. It can be also an APS-C size camera, because APS-C size cameras also, if they are lower megapixel, they don't contain as much detail. So let's say the sensor is it's much more forgiving, you know, like if you have a lower quality lens on it, it's not so big deal. But if you have a high megapixel count sensor, the lens has to be excellent, you know, to get all those sharp, excellent details in it. So if you think that I forgot something, or if you think that you want to add something constructive to this video, please feel free and leave a comment down below, and let's help others, you know, to learn in photography. That's the reason I'm doing these videos. So I hope that you like this video. If you like it, please like and subscribe and share my videos. And other than that, I'll see you in the next one. Take care, guys.